So we just got VRChat's new string loading and image loading features for Udon, and there's a lot of stuff that we can do with that. And I think a really good way to start with the string loading is to do a simple admin list, just a list of usernames on a website that you can access and then determine whether or not the local player is on that admin list, and give them the light toggle buttons or the video player buttons or whatever. The features are still pretty new, so there's occasional bugs here and there, and I'll make sure to go over what I know. So with that, let's get started. So first off, we need an actual thing that we're going to be toggling on and off, and we'll just be using this sign over here that says you're an admin. Over here, I'll have the admin list behavior, and here is the sign that we can turn on and off. Now this is going to be a little bit easier to explain by doing UdonSharp first and then moving to UdonGraph. I will explain both of them, but this will be a little bit backwards of how I normally do my videos, which is where I explain it in Graph first and then convert that into UdonSharp. You'll see why a lot of the features are a lot easier to show off in UdonSharp when I get to them. To start off with, let's actually just make our USharp script. I'm going to call this admin list sharp, since I'm going to distinguish between UdonSharp and UdonGraph in this project. You can just call it admin list or whatever, because I'm assuming you're just doing the one. After that all compiles, you can open it up, and I'm just going to be using Visual Studio for this. As always, I'm going to put my code into a namespace so that it doesn't obstruct anyone else's. So I'm just going to type namespace Valgen, open and close curly brackets, and put all of the code in there. Since this will be looking at a list of names on the internet and toggling a bunch of objects, the first two things we're going to do are make our VRC URL variable and our game object array. So we'll start with a public VRC URL, admin list URL, and then a public game object array, admin objects. These will just be things that get turned on if you're an admin and turned off if you're not. For the moment, let's actually go back into Unity and set up those two things. If we add our script onto our behavior, we'll see we got the slot for the URL and for the object. Just going to add the sign in here. And for the URL, I've gone and made a Pastebin post, which just has 3 names in it: Valgen, Mike, and Kevin. These are really easy to make, and Pastebin is one of the 3 URLs that are actually whitelisted by VRChat. So you can use any URL, but if you're using something that isn't GitHub Pastebin or GitHub Gist, you will have to require your users to have untrusted URLs enabled and then reload the instance if they were not. So I'm just using Pastebin. And if I want to get this raw data instead of loading the entire website, name and all, we will just hit the raw button and then copy this URL, which for some reason Google thinks is in Finnish, and we will be just getting this data here. I'll paste this URL here, and then we can go back to our code. One of the main advantages of having this pull from a website is that we can change that data at any time. So if there's an event going on, we can add or remove someone from the admin list. Since we can do that at any time, we'll want this event to be looping, so every 60 seconds or so it will pull from the newest list. Because of that, we'll be using send custom event delayed seconds. We're going to have a custom event that we will be calling with that event. So let's do a public void underscore download list, open close curly brackets, and the underscore is just to make sure it's never called over the network. So in order to actually download our URL, we're going to have to call from VRC string downloader, which as you see isn't coming up here at all. And that's because we need to use the namespace VRC SDK3 string loading, semicolon, end the line. And now this has gone green. We can type here load URL, and there's 2 things that we're going to have to pass it. The first one is obviously our URL, so admin list URL. Then normally we can end it like that, but that's because there's a second value in here that tells it what Udon behavior to tell, hey, the downloader system has finished downloading, do stuff with this information. By default, if you leave this empty, it'll just refer to itself. But there's currently an issue in UdonSharp where it does not do this, and we need to actually be able to tell it, hey, use this script specifically. But since it isn't looking for an Udon behavior, it's looking for a iUdon event receiver, we need to cast it as such, or basically tell it, hey, this is our script, but it's actually an iUdon event receiver. With USharp and C# in general, to refer to a script, we can just type this, but obviously this isn't an iUdon event receiver. And we get that by using the namespace VRC Udon common interfaces. And here we can just cast it, so put in parentheses iUdon event receiver. And now it'll call this URL and tell this script that, hey, we have finished downloading this URL. And of course, since we want this to loop every 60 seconds, we'll just make a float up here. So public float reload delay, and I'll have that be 60. Then the next line we'll just do send custom event delayed seconds. First, we could put in just the raw name, so in quotes underscore download. But if we ever wanted to change the name, it would be a lot easier to realize, oh, something has changed. So we want to do name of, and then pass that download list. Now we need to tell it how many seconds, so we'll just pass our reload delay and end the line. Now every 60 seconds, this will reload a download list and basically call this on a infinite loop. Of course, this actually needs to be called once for it to start the loop. So we're just going to have our start event, which happens right at the beginning, call underscore download list. Now, when a URL is loaded, there are two things that can happen. It can either succeed or it can fail. Maybe you just typed in the URL wrong and it didn't load, or maybe the website is just down. So we're going to need two different events to handle those two different scenarios. And those would be the public override on string load success, delete the baseline, and public override on string load error, delete the baseline. Now, this passes a result, which results have the full thing that it put out, the error code, the error message, anything that can come with a string that has succeeded or failed to download. We're just going to handle our error here quick, and we'll just have it log the fact that there was an error. So we'll do debug.log, and in here we'll pass result.error, and that will give us the whole error of what failed to load. But since we plan on actually succeeding our download, we want to actually do stuff with it here. Now, our result gives us the actual full string from the web page that we have downloaded, so let's make sure we have that stored. We'll do a public string, and I'll just call this admin page, since it's the whole page that you have downloaded. And we'll just set admin page to equal result.result. And that's just the whole output from the text. If we Control S to save and head back into Unity, we can actually enter play mode here quick to see what actually happens. Now, I'm going to change our reload delay from 60 to 10, just so they can actually load faster in case any changes are made. But now that's loaded, you see, hey, admin page has put Vaughan, though this doesn't show the whole thing, so if I copy it and paste it into the search bar here, you'll see it says Vaughan, Mike, and Kevin. That's just because this doesn't show each individual line, so it's all stuck in this line. Now that we've succeeded in downloading the web page, we actually need to split it up into the different names that are coming with it. And since I'm doing this by hitting return every time, we need to clear out every new line character and carriage return character. This can be done by a simple string split. But we're going to go up here and make a public string array so we can separate out all of the names, admin names. And right after our string load success, we'll just do admin names equals admin page dot split. We're going to have to tell it what characters to be splitting out. There's two different characters that we're going to need to get rid of. On Windows, it is the carriage return and new line characters, and on Linux and Android, it's just the new line characters. So we need to make sure we get rid of both of them. Since we do need to get rid of both of them, we're going to have to give an array of string characters that we're separating out. So we can just do new string array, and then curly brackets, and inside of here will be everything that we are clearing out. Now, a carriage return, or the generic return symbol, is represented by a \r, and that's just the return character. Since we want the new line character as well, we need a comma for a second one, and then in quotes, we do \n for new line. Now this will make it clear out any line breaks, any separations that we have, but it will still leave empty names in this array, which we don't want. So the second thing that we will be passing is a system string split options remove empty entries. I'll just extend this out a bit like this and semicolon to end the line. Now, we don't necessarily need system to be typed here. We can actually, in fact, just use it up here. So using system, and that cuts down on the amount of things we need to type down here. All right, now that this separates out all the names, we can go into Unity and hit play, and we'll see that once it loads up the web page, it'll separate out the entire page into these separate names inside of this array. You'll see it's loaded up and we have Vaughan, Mike, and Kevin. That separates everything out so that we can go through and actually use those names to compare against. So next we're going to need two things. We're going to need the local player's name to see if it's actually in this array, and we're going to need to store whether or not the player is an admin, because that can change if we remove someone from a list or add them to it. So first we'll have a public bool is admin, and then we'll have a private reference to the player's local name, since that never changes. Private string local name. And then in start, right before download list, we'll store local name as the networking local player display name. So now that we know their name, we can go and check for it in the array. First off though, we want to make sure that we've cleared out whatever the last situation was. So we're going to make sure that isAdmin is reset to false, and only set it to be true if we actually find it inside of that array. C# has some pretty good ways of finding out if a specific thing exists inside of a list or array, but since we're just in UdonSharp for now, we're going to be iterating through the entire array until we find it. Or if we don't, we don't. So we're going to use a for each loop for all of the names to compare against. We'll type for each parentheses, and we'll be getting a string for each one of the names. So for each string admin name in admin names, curly brackets. Now we have a reference to admin name for every single one of these. We can check to see if admin name equals local name, and if so, isAdmin equals true. Now, one of the advantages of UdonSharp and the for each loop is that now that we found it, we don't need to keep going through all of the other names. We can just hit break, and that ends the entire for each loop and lets us continue right down here. Very last thing for us to do is actually enable or disable the objects based on whether or not we are an admin. So we'll do another for each loop, and this one will be for each game object, just obj, in admin objects, and we'll just set obj.setActive is admin. So it will be turned on if you're an admin and turned off if you are not. Control S to save, and we can head back right into Unity. Now again, I've shortened this to 10 seconds, so this is easier to test, but again, you will likely want it as 60 seconds or the likes when you're actually in deployment. So now that we've launched in, you'll see it has separated into Vaughan, Mike, and Kevin again, and it's checked isAdmin, so it found my name Vaughan in that list. Now I'm using client sim, so I've set my name as Vaughan here in the editor, so that it knows the actual name to compare against. Now for the advantage of this system, I can actually just go pull up the page where we have the Pastebin with the name in it. I can just go and edit it and misspell my name here quick. So hit save quickly, and when we go back here, we'll watch as this gets updated to no longer be Vaughan, but instead just have the N gone, and now I'm no longer an admin. I'm no longer on this list, and it has disabled the object. And that's the whole thing. That is the whole admin system set up here in UdonSharp. Hi, Editor Vaughan here. If your username looks something like this, or someone on your list, you'll want to make sure you copy their name from the VRChat website, because they do some sanitation of certain symbols in usernames. If you want it to actually show up correctly and identify as their username, you're going to have to copy the one that VRChat is most absolutely definitely using. This is probably fine in 99.99% of situations, but you made this choice. You person with this name. Next, of course, we'll want to go through and do this with UdonGraph. Now, a lot of what you saw were these names and values changing in play mode, and UdonGraph doesn't support updating the inspector like that. So we'll pretty much have to make the entire thing and then test its end result. So I'm going to make a new UdonGraph program asset and just call this admin list graph. And quickly, I'm going to copy this URL before removing the component, adding a Udon behavior, and then putting our graph in there. Now that we have the graph, let's open it up here quick and set up a few variables. First of all, we need our URL, so we'll do a VRC URL, call this admin list URL, and set it to be public. Hit compile, and I'll just paste the URL there so I don't lose it. Next, we need all of the objects that we're turning on and off. So we'll do a game object array admin objects and set that to be public as well. Drop that down and just add the admin sign in there. And now we can get to setting up the actual code. So similarly, we're going to start with our custom event. So we'll do event custom, and I'm just going to call this, like I did there, underscore download list. The first thing that we want to do is just start downloading our URL. So I'll drag out from here and do load URL and connect that in. Since this feature works in UdonGraph, we don't have to connect anything to Udon behavior. We can just leave that empty. And of course, that will be fixed in UdonSharp eventually. It just isn't at the moment. Next, we of course want this to reset itself and call itself after a delay. So let's make a float variable up here and just call this reload delay. I'll set this to be public, default value of 60, compile, and I'll just set it to be 10 in the inspector for testing. Now in order to call this again, we'll do send custom event delayed seconds. We'll select the event download list from the dropdown, connect in the flow, and give it the reload delay into the delay seconds. And of course, we want to actually be able to start this event, so it won't ever loop if it's never called. We're just going to go to our start event, so event start, and we'll do send custom event and just select the download list option. Connect that in, and when you hit start, it'll do the whole thing. Same as with UdonSharp, we'll be using our success and fail events. So I'll just type success, so on string load success, then on string load error, and we can just put these down here. We'll just finish our string load error here quick, so we'll just do a debug log of the error message. So we can just select error, connect that in here, attach that to the debug log, and then we can move this out of the way since we will no longer be using this. As we did in UdonSharp, we want to actually store the result of downloading the web page as we did there. So we'll do a string variable and just call this admin page. Since we can't see this update in the inspector, I don't really have a reason to set it to be public, so we'll just leave it like that. I'll control drag out to get a set value for the variable, connect in the caret, and then let's get the result. So just type get result and connect that into the value. Next, as we did in UdonSharp, we want to split it up into the individual words instead of just having the entire big string that we get. So we'll drag out from admin page, do split, and then we're going to want to put this into a new string array variable. So string array and admin names. And again, since this can't be seen changing in the inspector, I don't need to set it to be public. Control drag out for a set value, and we can just connect that in here. Connect up the flow, and there we go. This is the part that starts to be a bit more difficult than it was in UdonSharp. If we just open up this, we can see that I'm passing it a new array with these two characters, the /r and the /n. These are represented as characters and not the literal string values of /n. What these are actually representing are those ASCII characters in the background that are the carriage return and the new line. But since these are chars or characters, we can't actually type those into a value in the graph. So you'll see in here, if I want to type \n, I can't do that because this only accepts a single value because it's only expecting a single normal character. So we're going to have to get some very specific values in order to put this in. Similar to UdonSharp, however, let's swap this over to string array, string split options, and just for now, select remove empty entries. Now we need to actually build this separator array. In UdonSharp, we just made it here quick in the same line, but we'll have to initialize this up in the start event. So we're going to want a new string array, and I'll just call this line separators. Now we'll do control drag out to set the value of this array. Now, when you're setting a value of an array, you need to use a constructor. So string array constructor. And this allows us to tell it how long it's going to be. Since we have two values that we're going to be setting, we're just going to set it to be 2. And then we'll put this in so that it happens before this. Of course, however, we need to actually set what those two values are, the \r and \n respectively. This becomes a little bit less obvious than I would really like it to be, but we're essentially going to be telling it the raw ASCII index of those two characters. In order to set those specifically, we'll drag out from line separators, drag out from there and do set, and we want stringarray.set, not set value. And we will be setting the index 0 to be 13 and the index 1 to be 10. And I'll show you quick why we are using these specific numbers. If I open up the page that shows me the full Ascii table, you'll see that we have carriage return and line feed on 13 and 10. And those are representative of the return and new line characters. Unfortunately, this means you just kind of have to either Google or remember the index of these two things if you're using Graph, but for now, that does work. So this is properly set to those two values in this array. So we'll go down to the separator and connect it in to that value. So now we'll split up the string based on that. Similarly, in UdonSharp, we immediately set isAdmin to be false to clear anything out. So let's make our bool isAdmin. And since we can't see these changed in the inspector, it doesn't need to be public. So right afterwards, we'll do a control drag out for a set value. And since we don't have a check mark for the specific value, we'll need a Boolean constant. So bool const, and we'll leave that unchecked so that the value will be false. Unfortunately, we don't have for each loops in UdonGraph like we do in UdonSharp, but we do have normal for loops. They have added a few tools to make this a bit easier though. So we can drag out from admin names and just right click and do generate for each loop. And that creates a for loop that essentially acts as a for each loop. We don't need this block here, so we can connect that into isAdmin where we're setting it. And then we can just line up everything so it's a bit more easy to read, get our reference here. Our debug log here is what we are doing actively with the individual object, similarly to what we would be doing here and checking our admin name. But we won't be using a debug log, we'll swap this out. This block down here represents the escape from it, so when we leave this loop. And we'll just connect things to this later. Now, instead of debug logging, we want to check this name against the player's local name. So let's go up and store that local name. We'll do a string value local name, and then control drag out from that, and we will be setting this here at the beginning of start. We'll be setting it to networking local player, and dragging out from there for display name and connecting that into value. We'll just move everything out of the way so that it's connected in right at the beginning, and then we'll just line everything back up again. Now that we have the local player name, we can check against it with a equality check. And since we're checking this specific name, we'll drag out from local name, check the equality, and then we want to get a branch here. A branch is just your true-false check. So instead of our debug log, we'll connect into this branch, delete that, and if it is true, we want to set isAdmin to be true. I'll just copy these nodes and put them over here, and check this value here. Now, if it's false, we again don't want to do anything, especially because in UdonSharp, we can break out of these loops, but in UdonGraph, we cannot. So we need to let it resolve and go through every single name. So if it finds one that isn't your name, we don't want it overriding the fact that it did just find the right name with the fact that it just looked at a bad name. Now that we've set this value, we can take our block and swap it out for our for loop for the objects, for turning them on and off. So similarly, I'll drag out from admin objects, right click it, and then do generate for each loop. And I'll just line everything up here the same way I did with the other one. We won't need our debug log, but we can have it hold that position, but we definitely won't need our block because we won't need any code after this. Steal our block here and line it up there. We can delete these two blocks so that everything just goes together. And instead of debug logging from this game object, we want to do set active and pass the value isAdmin. So we'll stick that in here, and this will subsequently enable the object if you're an admin, and disable it if you are not. Let's just line up these things here, and there we go. That is our entire graph. We'll go back to our scene view. One quick note, there's currently a tracked canny, so this will be resolved eventually, but if you are currently using the editor settings reload domain disabled in this for fast play mode entering, this will actually cause a issue currently, and again it will be resolved, with the queuing for these URLs. URL loading, for security reasons, is delayed by 5 seconds for every one. So if you try to load 8 URLs right at the beginning, it'll queue them all up in a list and do one by one every 5 seconds. However, if the domain doesn't reload here in the editor, it won't be able to clear out that queue. So let's say I loaded 3 URLs at the beginning of my event. The next time I open play mode, if I have this disabled, it will still think that, oh, it has those 3 queued up, we need to delay it more. So it'll delay it by 15 seconds, which is the 5 times the 3 that it already tried to do. Again, this issue should be gone eventually. It's just one that you might have to worry about if you are currently using these play settings. So for now, I'll keep reload domain checked, but I typically leave it unchecked just because of how fast it lets you get into play mode. So here again, we can hit play, and once it loads up, you'll see that this object should get disabled because my name is still spelled wrong on the website. And there we go, it goes away. So if I grab the website again, I can go and edit it, put my name back to being spelled right, save changes, and then we should see it here reload and actually get my username right again, and then enable the object. Alright, it didn't because I screwed up one thing. Here, we're actually trying to split by the numbers 13 and 10. We're not actually setting these ASCII characters. That was my mistake. So instead of setting it to be 13 and 10 here, we need to be doing char convert from UTF-32. And that is where we will type 13 and 10. And all this does is get the actual value from that ASCII index. Now that we're back in play mode, you'll see that it hasn't disabled this object because my name is still fixed on the list. So if we go back to it and once again hit edit and misspell my name, save changes, we can watch as it disappears. And there we go. That's the whole admin list working again in play mode. So now we have the ability to do it in Graph and the ability to do it in UdonSharp. And again, this can be expanded way beyond just toggling objects on and off. It can be set to call events on scripts. It can realistically do anything, but toggling objects on and off was the fastest and probably the most universal application for this kind of tool. Of course, if you have objects that are admin specific, you'll probably want to manually disable them at start in the event that someone's internet takes a little bit longer to load that URL and it doesn't immediately get disabled. So you'll want to actually have it set up so that it's ready for that. As well, if you have a lot of other things in your scene that try to download a string URL at the beginning, it might accidentally get the admin list queued way later on. If you have 6 different strings that you're trying to download right at the beginning, you might accidentally get your admin list set right at the end, which will take 30 seconds. So they won't have those admin permissions done until then. If this is your only string downloader, then it should almost absolutely guaranteed be done downloading by the time the player has fully loaded the scene. So you should be good. And there you have it. I know this one was a lot longer and a bit more technical, and I even had to start with UdonSharp first in order to explain a few things, but hopefully this was helpful, and I know I haven't done too many of these for a bit, but here's to us getting back into it. Alright, we'll see you again.